Hello, everyone, and welcome to our TEL 711 Module 3 discussion. This week, we are talking about the local context section. We read 3 dissertations in Chapter 1 of the Brinkmann and Kvale textbook, and we'll be discussing our thoughts about the inquiry and research process with the following question. What are the essential elements of a well-written local context? That is to say, what content should be included in a well-written, comprehensive local context section. So I read 3 dissertations and kind of went through each of them. They had 2 of them for sure were very similar. They actually referenced each other in their dissertations, which was pretty cute, just to see that community of practice that happened there. But for me, the big things that stood out was the initially it was like the 5 W's, but I actually took off the 5th W. So for me, it was the who, what, where, and when. Why, I feel like is in the purpose, but in the who, the author identified themselves, their role. They identified the other people that were involved in the study. One important thing, particularly that I've seen, was also something that happened when I was in my master's program, the number of students enrolled that are at the school. If it happens at a particular school, like that is an important thing. In the what, there was some, like in both of them, there was some initial data analysis that they had to set up their like problem purpose, which I thought was kind of interesting because I don't know that I've actually looked at that really. Of like it was almost like they conducted some research pre going into their research is what I found when they had some of those pre questions set up. The where, so like what kind of school it was, what grade level it is, the type of school. They listed academic performance in one, so like what kind of neighborhood it's in. And then as far as the when, this is really just around like the school year that, the research took place. So those were most of the elements that I noticed that were in the different contexts.
I'll jump in here, Kelly. So when I was interpreting the question, I thought, well, of the 3 dissertations, not that this is about comparing, but I felt the 3rd one was most informative, and I liked that approach the most. And probably because, I think she went from national context. She talked about the effects of the problem at the national level. Then she started to break out into like, what are the reasons for why this is happening? What are some of the current remedies that are happening right now? What is the state context? What's the personal context? And then what's the current situation? So she did this funnel, which I really appreciated, because what it did for me was it created a sense of urgency, relevance, and then like actually urgency. Like I was like, yes, like this is a problem. Like I didn't realize how bad the situation was for first-year teacher retention. We always talk about student retention, but what about teachers? I thought it was a beautiful job of like expressing the situation, not just in terms of facts, but implications. And so local context, when I think about it, I think it matters a lot because of this whole concept of transferability versus generalizability, which is the issue. Right? That's the big differentiator, or a big differentiator in terms of action research versus a different approach to our dissertation. So transferability requires understanding everything that you can about the context of someone's study so that the reader can determine for themselves if the study will work for them too. So what that makes me think is that in terms of the question, what are the essential elements? As the author, you need to think about, if you were reading someone else's study with the same problem of practice, what are the elements that you need to know about to determine whether that research makes any sense for what you want to study? So I even think that the set of essential elements can shift depending upon the problem of practice. Like it may, like that kind of sounds so obvious, but maybe it was a genius thought. I don't know. Then the last thing I wrote was, a good local context is about considering the system itself and the various factors that intersect in that system, so as to not present just a one-dimensional view. It also helps others in the ecosystem learn about their connection to the problem and solution. So a strong local context also makes the non-obvious players say, wait a minute, I have a role in this too. Or, oh my gosh, wait a minute, this has implications for me too. So it also shines a light on who or what are the other factors in that are playing out in the problem of practice. So those are some of the thoughts that came to my mind.
Yeah, thank you. I like that last thought, Sandra, about how it it almost, I might say that it pulls people in, I think, by giving that context, even if, maybe the first, when I sit down, I see, retention of teachers, is that really relevant? But then as I start to resonate with some of the things potentially in that local context, I can say, okay, this is something that is important that I should look at. I think as I was thinking about this prompt, I think I just started coming up with maybe some of the questions that I would want to answer if I were to sit down and write it, which I realize we're very close to doing.
Tell us what those questions are.
Yeah, I think for me there was this sort of, we're setting up why this is a problem, right? And why it's a problem in the local context, which again, I think, to your point, Sandra, about the differentiator about action research, right? So this idea that we're doing something that's within our scope of influence and allows change in that local context, which is why I think this is such an important piece of an action research dissertation. And I think, Kelly, to a point you made, there was really this sense of what's been done about it already. Has there been something that's been tried either by the researcher themselves or the larger context that they are in, right? Has the school done something already? Were there other interventions that were tried? There's almost like telling the story of what led up to, why this was something that the researcher identified as being a problem. And so I appreciated that, what had been done, what had been tried. They seemed to talk about what led to even their own knowledge of the problem. So I was, it was interesting to me that there were these first person references in there about like what brought them to this place, which again, maybe for me, there was this again, sort of almost story elements that ran through this local context of telling a story as to what brought them to do this research. And then it did seem to ultimately lead them to, and that is why I decided to do, right? And then kind of enters into this, they introduced the idea of their intervention, I think in a little bit of, maybe why they thought that this was going to be an important thing as it relates to the local context, right? So not just like unpacking the whole intervention, but, this is why I think under these conditions in the story I've told that this is going to be an important thing. So I think, for me, that was really interesting. I was surprised by the amount of detail. I think the writing that I've done in my space, I'm not sure like I would have right? Like it was almost like, and then tomorrow and then the next day we tried this. And then so that's interesting for me to think about as I think about starting to craft this, is maybe really getting down in the details. And I'd maybe just be interested to know from the two of you, I think one of the questions that kept running through my mind was, they've got a lot figured out that I don't have figured out. And if we are writing a draft of this in the next couple of weeks, what does that look like? And is this draft experience something that helps to uncover maybe, some of those gaps? But I was just struck by their certainty that I don't have today sitting here.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the questions I was going to ask both of you was, did it give you ideas of what you would put? And you basically just said that, like you were coming up with questions, because I was sort of doing that. I'm in an interesting place because I sort of have already come up with an innovation. Like I kind of came into this with an innovation. Yeah. And so I'm sort of there. And I feel like particularly reading the two that I read, the educational technologists, because they're aligned with like what I'm doing very closely.
I thought of you as I read them.
And I think that they were in the same place too. Like if you read about like that it was their job and what they were doing, it's not like they were like, I'm going to get a doctorate. Oh, now I got this job. Now I'm going to do this. I'm pretty sure it was like the other way around. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that it's like a detriment. Like if you don't have your innovation and you're not there yet, I think that that's fine. Because I've gone into lots of conversations where I'm like, well, I'm not really sure if it's this, but it is like pretty fleshed out for me. Like I feel like it is. It keeps like polishing in different ways. But so yeah, I mean, I feel like I have enough to like fluff it out to where, if that's what I don't know if that's what it will end up being at the end. One of my questions that I have is about this. it ties like several of our readings together where it from the small wins, there was this idea of, I wrote down the word silo. He didn't use the word silo, but there was a part in the small wins article in our other class where it talked about really kind of like sheltering yourself outside of the system in order to accomplish things. And I found that in contrast with like our systems thinking class and creating those big diagrams where we have everything. And then now we have local context. And like Sandra and Kamar, we've talked about national, state, local. And I'm like, where's this balance between all these different things we read? You know, it's almost like chaos theory where a butterfly flaps its wings in the rainforest can affect something that we're doing. So like, where do we draw the line? Like, that's the hard part I'm going to have is like, I could point to so many different systems, you know what I mean, affecting it. And so I guess with local context, I think that like earlier before we started this call and recording, when you pointed out local, I think that's like really the key part there is like, what is it in our sphere of influence? I think Sandra, you said that too, that that is going to be a part of this study, I guess. So I don't know.
I think so. Now we're blending all the classes together. So let's just go there. But
well, I think that's the point.
That's the point. The point is to make us crazy. Remember when we were doing the circles and not the circles, the diagrams for Dana's class, right?
Yes, yes.
We were mapping out what the ecosystem looked like. And so I think about that as the backdrop to the small wins conversation, because I do think that the small win, like I said in the other call, small wins or planning for small wins is absolutely strategic. And you know, as we saw in our own mapping, there was no, I don't think I saw anyone's map that like was linear. It was just, you know, we were placing things in this great circle or in this oval, whatever. The idea that we would choose based on our local context, our local sphere of influence, an action research project that fits in this ecosystem that has play, it has some play, but it isn't linear. Like whether something goes into your favor or not, you're moving in the same direction at least, or at least averting one of those big catastrophes. But I do think that it's both and, Kelly. It's yes, like to actually get and then there's the work of packaging that small win with as much success factor as you can. And that's when you put those boundaries around it and you're trying to keep it. But the psychology of the small win doesn't, I don't think, cancel out its power in terms of the ecosystem potential. And I think to your question, Kamara, when we did Mertler's concept paper, in that concept paper, we had to talk about our journey to the problem of practice. And then I was taken aback. I was like, oh, she said the word I think it was the third dissertation. I
know.
She's talking like, and then I did this, and then I did that. I'm like, we can do that. Like, can we talk like that? Can we write like that? So this idea that I guess the personalization, the local context includes us.
Yes, right.
Not as
a researcher.
So then I'm like, oh, I could write a lot about that because, you know, how I feel I've come to this is pretty much like my life's work. My challenge is that it's like two different streams, and that's where I'm confused because I don't know how to talk about. For me, it's not just student retention and this idea of a first year course. It's this other work that I have of change making and putting this on top of this. So I have this, I'm a little nervous. I'm very nervous about what's going to stand out as like, is my reader or my readers going to say like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about this or are you talking about this? And can I talk about both and how to bring them together? But I worry about getting the institutional data just because I worry about that with my anything that has to do with my workplace. I really have low confidence in terms of it being easy and not bumpy and not like unnecessarily bureaucratically difficult. So, and I know we need all of that. We need all for me, like I'm going to need all those numbers, all that analyses that's already, you know, so that is just a concern of mine. But I think the three of us, from what I can tell, we all pretty much have enough of the content for our local context. It's just a matter of organizing it. So.
Yeah. Well, I am having to go through my institutional IRB for cycle 0. So my IRB person got back to me last night. So yeah, which I'm not surprised. I figured I would at the medical school. I figured that was just the way it was going to be. So yeah, I know there's lots of things that are interesting. And I'm thinking about this, the bounding articles that we've read, right? And coming back to that idea of And Sandra, I think you said it so well, right? You almost have to think big to understand all the forces and factors in order to get small enough to then figure out, you know, like in the wicked problem, right? What's one of the levers that we could pull? And to me, that's what our interventions or innovations are. That's what a small win is. It's this one of those little levers in a wicked problem. But if you don't understand the wicked problem, you can't figure out what, you know, what that small strategic piece
Win.
might be.
Yeah. We just tied the entire 3 semesters together so beautifully.
Beautiful. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this week, and there's your summary and recap.
Learning.
Brought to you in full Technicolor glory. So anyway, everyone have a fantastic week, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.